obscure world of parking. We use it every day, but have we really capitalized on the intricacies of our industry? In this podcast, the Parking Network will go behind the scenes and talk to industry professionals about all things parking, from the horizon of evolving technology and even stories of the old days. We hope to encourage and inspire operators and property managers alike to look at parking through a new lens.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Parking Industry Podcast. Today, we have Trina Tudor and Leigh Thomas, along with Clyde Wilson. We have, we're an industry or a company with a very, very varied background. I've been in the parking business 45 years, and I started in it in Nashville, Tennessee, working for Monroe Carroll, who was one of the true pioneers of the parking industry that we have today. So I got to learn a lot from him, but I also got to work in a lot of different types of operations. And over the next 18 years, I worked in all the different types of operations that we have today with all the different equipment and software and all those things. And then started the Parking Network 25 years ago, really for the purpose of changing my look at the industry. So now I am a part of this wonderful company with these new people. Krista, who's not with us today, now she's 5+ going on 6 years. So she's starting to turn into a veteran. You can't be 5 years in this business and not be a true veteran. Trina's coming right up behind her. Trina, you're 3 years coming in, and they work on a lot of different projects every month. So they get to see a lot of people and a lot of challenges. And then Leigh's the newest member of this crowd. So Leigh comes in and has this tremendous perspective of what she's seeing that she never thought she would see in the parking industry. So we then just get in these conversations as a company. When we have our company meetings or when we have another special meeting about some topic, as they all know and have to suffer through, I'm a storyteller, so I can talk forever, especially about our industry. So they get to listen to some of my ramblings about the parking industry. So just last week, we were talking about several different things that we're working on right now. We're working on several very challenging programs. And we were talking about that, and Leigh said something very interesting in the discussion. And I think Shiloh, who you didn't see, but she runs our program behind the scenes, said, "Oh, that sounds like a podcast to me." So we decided to do the podcast today based on that conversation that the four of us had about their view of the industry, which is very interesting to me because I can see them seeing things that I probably had to be in the industry a lot longer before I understood it. So let's start. And since Leigh was the one that made the first comment that got us here today, let me ask Leigh first your view of this challenging business. I'm sure, number one, when you came into this, you had no idea what you were getting into. And so now you have a fairly good understanding, and you made some pretty good comments the other day. So why don't you start out with your view of what you've seen and your first comment, which was one of the very first things that I learned from Monroe Carroll that I had to be really good at. And if I couldn't be good at that, I really couldn't do this business. So I thought that was very interesting that was the first comment you made. So why don't you start us out with your view of this wonderful, challenging industry?
For sure. I agree. I didn't even know this was an industry. I would just go park my car and not think anything of it. But turns out people have struggled and belabored over that parking spot. So I now take parking seriously and I appreciate it very much. But this roundtable discussion that Clyde mentioned a moment ago was about our parking operators. And so as auditors, each of us oversees parking facilities. And so each facility has an operator, and we were just having a conversation about what our operators are doing that really works. What really works? And we were discussing how, from an auditing standpoint, there are some things that some of our operators do really well that makes their job easier, smoother, better, which in turn makes our job smoother, easier, and better. So my first thing to offer the conversation today and for our listeners is our operators who do well are the ones who really pay attention to the details. Um, just making sure that the small things like spelling and rates and communication, like paying attention to the details and making sure things are consistent. As an auditor, nothing can jam up a data or a story that the data is trying to tell faster than inconsistent details. So that's my first thing. So Trina and Clyde, let's talk about paying attention to details for a moment.
Yeah, what I'll add to that is not just the details, but like you're saying, keeping the details consistent across. There's so many different pieces of a parking operation, right? There's the billing system, there's the parks system, there's all these different pieces, and having those details consistent throughout is super important. Not just for us, but for the operator as well.
Yeah, people don't, as Leigh said earlier, she just parked her car. She doesn't realize that the person that's managing all of that has um, rates to manage, and you have to look at rates from who's parking with me at who's paying what rate because they're a different type of customer. You have the equipment that goes in. It's got to go up. It's got to work every day. Gate actually has to go up 500 times a day, and you as the parking manager have to be prepared to make sure that it does that. You have to be organized and detailed enough in advance to be sure that you start a day with those things. Then you have cleanliness. You got to be sure your garage is ready every morning. You can't open a garage with trash can overflowing and garbage. You can't do that. So that's a detail. Being sure that all of those things are taken care of. You have to be sure that whatever communications devices are in there for your customer, if they need something, can get to you or to somebody who can help them. So if you make a list of the detailed items that a young new parking manager has to be able to juggle every morning before the day starts, it's a long list. There are not many jobs out there that have that long a list every morning when you come to work. It's a challenge.
And then to add to the challenge, the parking operator or manager can't do the whole thing by himself. So he or she has to take the time to properly train the ones on the ground on the details, train them how to enter new customers and train them how to take care of customer service. And that's a lot
Right.
of details.
Yeah, it is. It is a lot of detail. It's a tremendous management challenge to be able to pull all those things off. And generally, those people are relatively young, inexperienced managers that are on the front line. The front line people are very inexperienced, and so you have to identify somebody that has attention to detail to really do well in our business. And you can see pretty quickly if they don't have it, they are not going to do well with us. It's just too hard for a manager who doesn't ingrained have that attention to detail as a part of their personality.
So I wonder if that would be a good part of the interview process. Whenever you're hiring someone new, maybe ask a question like, can you give me an example of how you're a detail-oriented person? Or something like that. That might be an interesting thing to clear up when you're in the hiring process.
They're in an interview. This is the best you get, right? That person sitting in front of you, what you're seeing now is the best you're going to get. They have attention to detail. They have everything perfect. And then when they're sitting there listening, they're listening to what you're saying. They're paying attention. They're answering questions. And that's about the best I've been able to do at really getting to an interview process and catching on to somebody's ability to handle attention to detail. you guys may be able to do that far better than me. Most people are. It's never one of my skills.
So what are some practices that operators could do that would help with the detail piece of things? Like, what are some routines or something that maybe you've seen Clyde work or Leigh that help them keep up with those details?
I'll answer this first, and Leigh's answer is probably far better than me. Only thing I know is what worked for me, and what worked for me originally. When I went to my first parking job, which was basically my first real job out of the military, was in the military, then came back, finished college, and then ended up in the parking business. I had a 2-year hiatus there that we won't discuss, but I wasn't in jail. But
Okay, I won't ask you on the podcast, but maybe I'll ask you later.
Later, right? So the job that I had in the military really prepared me, and I would not have survived that had I not had attention to detail. And it was one of those jobs that the people that I worked for in the military said, this kid over here can do this, and we've got to get this done. And I ended up in this job. So when I went to parking, I really, as I've told you in one of the earlier podcasts of how I got into the parking business, that story, I was really looking for, I knew one thing that I had done well, the only one thing I had done well in my life, in working in the military, I knew that I needed a challenging. So I found this job that at first I laughed at. And as I interviewed with Monroe Carroll, who was an electrical engineer graduate from Vanderbilt, I realized, there's a lot more to this than I realized. And then he managed me and let me know almost every day, and maybe sometimes it seemed every hour, that attention to detail was my only survival. And it was his way of letting me know that I had to think about it every day. And so I did during those younger days and in the challenges. I knew attention to detail. I knew that I couldn't just walk in a room and sit down. I had to walk in the room and be sure I knew everything that was going on in there. And I knew then on the bigger picture, I had to walk into a garage and see everything. I had to see. Some people have laughed at me over the years. I'll still walk up to a ticket dispenser and swipe my finger across the front or across the top to see how dusty it is.
You bring your white gloves into parking garages?
Yes. But it's one of those attention to detail items. And when I walk through a parking garage, I see an awful lot. So you have to be able to do that or you can't be in this business. So there are a lot of people out there that are far better at it than I would ever be, but I know it's an important part of this business.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a good aspect of this is that attention to detail is something that some of us have to be intentional about. I think some people are naturally wired to be attentive to detail, like our resident researcher, Trina. She's really good at this.
She is.
And she makes it look so easy and natural. But I have to be very intentional and purposeful. But it's important. I think that's what we agree on.
I agree with you. I notice Trina all the time, and I notice how she has that natural ability.
Yeah, for sure.
So
what else is important?
She's way ahead of me.
I think it's a blessing.
Well, things like that are usually blessings. None of those big items are 100% blessings.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the bad side of that attention to detail and some of the other skills. But that's okay. You just have to accept the good with the bad, or the bad with the good. So we can move on to one of the other items I think that we discussed the other day. And it was funny for me listening to this. They were bringing up topics to me, and I'm sitting there going, these are all the things that I learned over the years that were just the most important. And they're sitting here repeating them to me, and they're new in this business. So I was really impressed. The second item that falls very much into this, I think that one of you two mentioned, was organizational skills. And in this very complex business, organization is such a tremendous part of it because there are just so many things going on at the same time. When you're managing a day-to-day parking operation that has, possibly 1,000 people a day with different needs coming in and out of your facility, and you have people expecting of you, you've got a boss expecting things of you, you've got all this stuff. It's a challenge. So tell me what you guys have seen.
The idea of organization, I've been curious about it because, like Clyde mentioned, I came into the parking industry not long ago, and I know it only from the auditing perspective. I have never one day worked in a facility. But I see these managers and the amount of what is paperwork, whether it's digital or actual paper, it's all paperwork. And I see the enormity of it. And it made me think of when I was a classroom teacher, which is the profession I was before I joined TPN. But that profession also has a lot of paperwork. And my mother-in-law was so kind to me. She was also a seasoned educator, and she taught me to touch each paper only once. So I would get the paper out of the folder, I would grade it, put a grade on it, put it in the computer, send an email if I needed to, and then file the paper where the child could pick up the paper. So this idea of efficiency and being efficient in the small things so that I could be efficient in the big things. So I just wonder, how does that translate to a parking person who is dealing with parking paperwork?
I think, again, it comes back to organizationally the day-to-day challenges of every parking manager, of all the things that we've talked about. If you don't have some source of organization, you can probably get through most days, but the bad day's coming. I don't care what you do, the bad day's coming, and it's coming when the gate breaks down at 7:30 in the morning, when 1,000 people are outside in the streets trying to get in your facility, and now they're mad. And it's coming when the building owner asks you for information that you really don't have right at your fingertips, but you've still got a garage to run every day, but you've got to answer that question. And your boss over here is asking questions. Or if you're not organized, when those bad days come, you will certainly drown. It is a really, really big challenge. And I think we were talking the other day, and I've thought about it since our last conversation that we had about the person that I was talking about that had worked for a small company and now works for a big company. And when he moved over to the big company, the amount of organizational skills were far beyond what he had to do in dealing with the small company. And I thought about that, and I thought, it may be like Trina said earlier, with this thing that's a good thing and a curse at the same time. The technology and the communications of today that we're going to talk about here in just a minute, the ability to communicate today lets a lot more people get to you. Used to be hard. When I was managing a parking operation and sitting in my office in downtown Houston or downtown wherever, the president of the company had trouble getting to me. I was out running around to facilities. I didn't have a cell phone back in that day. So the president, the attorney that used to call me all the time, some of the people that we were reported financial information to, they had trouble getting to me. So my demands on keeping up with them was not anything what it became later on, and what I see these guys that are trying to manage parking today, how demanding it is, because everybody can get to them. Everybody can get to them. So organizational skills help you be able to communicate better. My take. You guys have your own answers. So I think that probably leads into the last one of those items that we talked about the other day, and it's communications. Today, the parking industry, that probably is the one thing that has changed For me, the industry more than anything is I can get, as a parking manager today, I can talk to anybody and I can put my fingers on anything I need. Where before, Miss Helen was the lady in the front of the central parking office, and she had a safe behind her, and all the day's records went in that safe, right? And she had them all day long. So to me, learning to be a new parking manager, I wanted to see those. So I'd wait till Miss Helen left. She didn't like me messing with her paperwork. I'd wait till Miss Helen left. I'd go open the safe and get the paperwork out and go through it, and look at all the daily sales and the tickets that we had written on those things. Today, that information's all over. All of you are sitting right now with access directly to all of these locations all over the country, and you have access to almost everything instantly. So I think that level of communication also adds to the expectations of us as a manager. Trina, what do you think?
Yeah. So one of the things we talked about when we were talking about the communication piece is prioritizing. So even if you do have a bunch of, people contacting you or whatever, you need to prioritize the things that are important that'll help with your organization and the details that'll help with those two pieces that we've already talked about. The other piece of the communication that we talked about, which was the customer service communication. So knowing those things about your garage will help you with the customer service.
Yeah, I've in a few speeches and probably a couple of articles that I've written, one of the things that secretly kind of is changing how we manage the business is we used to have a customer that would drive downtown to go park in one of our garages. They didn't. Only thing they knew was the address, and maybe the address. So when they drove down there, they would go to the address and look, and if they saw a place to park, they would park there. They were afraid to pass it because there may not be anything for a while. Well, now we have this funny thing. We have an educated customer. We never had one of those before. It took me a few years to get used to having customers that knew too much. So it's been a really interesting change in our parking business in that we have customers that use communication to know the answers to the parking question before they get in the car. They know the rates, and in today's case, they can already have purchased their parking before they turn the key in the car. To go to that place, they have looked at, they've got it punched into GPS, so that's where they're going, and they've made their decision. So they're not driving downtown trying to make a decision. They've already got it. Communication has changed our customer, and it was a big change to those of us who live without a smart customer that didn't know anything but drive down and look for a sign. That sign was really important because that's what they look for. Now, not so much.
Another part of communication is talking to the people above, like the owners of the facilities. And that also looks like a really difficult part of the job. So what can we say about that? Like, how can our operators communicate well to their, what are they called? Bosses? Owners? I don't know what they're called.
Owners.
Okay.
The owners of in most cases, a Class A commercial office building. So you're really talking about the owner's rep. The representative of the ownership is who they generally report to.
So like, what if the operator needs something? How does he ask the owners for the thing that he needs?
Well, that again is one of the topics we talked about the other day, and it's a really, really interesting topic because as auditors, we have seen this many times where we go in and we start finding a problem trail, and the operator says, "We've been telling the owner that they need to fix this and that we need this and we need that," and I say, I read all the files. I didn't see anything in there. Or I did see some mention in a letter, but the letter didn't have any passion in it. and you're asking for $20,000. So it is, again, it's just one of those many things that people in our business have to do. We have so many skills that are required that I don't think anybody realizes, and that as a young parking manager sitting in the parking garage of a commercial office building, you've got to communicate to somebody maybe 20 years older than you, who's been in business for a long time and who knows how to disregard you pretty quickly if you don't come with something serious enough. So, as I told somebody that used to work for us just recently, and I was visiting them in their new job, and we were having lunch, and she asked me about my biggest advice to her. And I said, you've got to learn how to communicate to the people above you. You have to learn how, if you need something, to develop the communication that you send forward that says, we need this. This is important to our operation. It impacts our customers. It impacts us financially. You've got to learn how to do that in 3 paragraphs max. You can't write a book. You've got to do it in 3 paragraphs max, 2 or better. And it's a really important skill because we all work on a budget. If it ain't in the budget, you're not going to get it. So if you need to put it in the budget, you have to communicate well enough to a person above you who really doesn't want to hear it, that you need these resources to be able to manage the parking facility correctly.
And the information that you need to offer the owners are what your garage needs, and then why you need it, and then how it's going to make the operation smoother or the revenue greater. You really have to be convincing. Like, channel your high school speech class and do that thing. Right?
That's right. Yeah, no, it is certainly a skill, and you know what? It's one of those skills that we don't do anything teaching. I have never been to anything in my years as a young person in the parking business that taught me how to communicate to the people above. So it's a very, I mean, I've had audits that came to me. One of my biggest ones, and I'll use it for stories from. I'd actually planned to use it on the next Stories from the Road, and I won't tell the story here today, but it was a story of what turned out to be a very big amount of money missing, and the operator. Once I did the audit and the results came out really bad for the operator came right to me and said, we've been telling the property manager that this equipment doesn't work and we needed new equipment. And I said, yeah, I saw a letter in the file about 3 years ago that said something about you kind of needed new equipment. You've gone 3 years. You hadn't said anything else about this. But it was the lack of communication, because the young lady that managed this building is the one that called me because she said, there's stuff going on in my garage and my operator says it's not. And I know there is. She was on it. She would have paid attention if they had sold the trouble they were having correctly, and would have been the first one to say, you're right, we need to look at doing this. Can you guys get some bids for me and tell me what we're up against to get this done? I know her. I mean, I'd never met her before until she called me about this audit. But I got to know her really well. And I saw the file and said, you know, all this would have taken would have been a good work in communications. And she would have said, you know, you're right. Our revenue's down. And this is probably why it's down. And we really need to get this. So let's start the process of getting the bids and starting how to change this. They didn't do it.
That's too bad. Missed opportunities.
Yes. And it's a great Stories from the Road. I'll do that one on the next Stories from the Road. This one was a fun one and funny as crap at the end.
I look forward to it. Okay, so Clyde, when we were chatting about this a couple of days ago, I asked you what advice, or just what advice do you have? And your answer was so profound to me that I'm gonna paraphrase it to you, and then I would love to hear your thoughts. You were reminiscing about your time as an operator, and you shared that in that season, your perspective or your focus was on making budget, making the bottom line. And you wished that you could have enjoyed that season with the perspective of meeting the customer's needs and keeping that as your priority. And so I just think that's really powerful to remember that we are a people-based business, not whatever else we substitute in there.
It's it's one of those. That's a funny thing that you picked up on that, and you thought it was important. I can quickly, without going into long detail, tell you that the person that I worked for when I started in the business demanded that you make a 25% increase in revenue every year. You were expected. Your budget was based on 25%, and he said, "Don't bring me anything less than 25%. Don't bring me." So you had a challenge to make a 25% every year, year in, year out, was
Exhausting.
really hard. It was really hard.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think I understood after a little bit of getting beat up on all sides of this, that you only made the 25% if your customers were happy. Because they're the ones that keep coming in there every day or not. And so it was you had to get both sides of this. It was really, you had to make the budget, and he demanded 25%. If I looked at somebody today and said, you got to make 25% every year, they'd laugh at me. But we took it very seriously, and it was hard, very hard to do. But I did finally catch on to the fact that I can do the 25%, but somehow I've got to do that and keep all the customers happy too. And because we ran a few off, and a few of my attempts to get revenues up at a few of my some more long stories that would be very interesting. But a few of my attempts that turned out to be not so good trying to accomplish that made me realize these two things go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. You're expected to make a budget, but you're also expected by your customers to provide them with a great, safe, clean place to park.
Right. Well, to our listeners, thank you for spending a half an hour with us today. I hope you tasted the uniqueness of TPN Consulting. We have a passion for helping parking industry folks, but also a really deep knowledge and interest in your success. So if you need to hear more of us, check out our other podcast episodes, or reach out to us on our socials, or shoot us an email. We'd be happy to help. Have a great day.
To quote one of the greatest business minds of our time, Charles Munger, he said, "The best thing a human can do is help another human being know more." Here on our Parking Industry Podcast, we want to provide knowledge and resources. If you heard something that sparked your curiosity in today's episode, please reach out on our socials at TPN Consulting. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. See you next time on Our Parking Industry.